Imagine a country where the average human being dies before their 38th birthday.
Yeah, which is just a devastating statistic right out of the gate.
Right. And then imagine that buying a loaf of bread in that exact same country requires like a literal wheelbarrow of cash because inflation has skyrocketed past 4,000%.
4,000%. I mean, the math there just kind of breaks your brain.
It really does. But here's the kicker for you listening. Imagine that exact same country is simultaneously sitting on over $70 billion of oil wealth.
Yeah, that's the paradox. Extreme, almost unimaginable scarcity occupying the exact same geographic space as multi-billion-dollar abundance.
Exactly. So today, we are dissecting the ultimate economic paradox, Angola. And to figure out how this happens, we're diving deep into this fascinating, highly data-driven academic report.
It's titled Multidimensional Data Analysis of Angola's Socioeconomic Evolution and Development Bottlenecks from 1990 to 2023.
Right. And it specifically looks at empirical research based on macroeconomics, public health, and institutional governance. And for you listening, I really want to set the scene with this source material.
Oh, the presentation itself. Yeah, it's striking.
It really is, because the presentation is so, well, it's stark. There
Yeah.
are no glossy stock photos of oil rigs or, smiling children.
Right, none of that corporate brochure stuff.
None of it. It's pure minimalist academic rigor.
Hmm.
Like page one is just this pure white background, a dark gray vertical line for alignment, and this deep blue sans serif font for the title.
Yeah, with that little scamp in the corner that just says data-driven academic report. They strip away all the redundant images. It's just raw data showing a society going through one of the most volatile transformations on the planet.
And that stark design makes the findings so much more powerful, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because the researchers aren't trying to sell you a political narrative. They're just looking at 30 years of hard metrics to figure out where the friction is.
Right, like why isn't that immense oil wealth translating into a better life for the average citizen?
Exactly. And the executive summary on page 2 lays out a high-level roadmap of the 4 core pillars we're going to explore today.
Yeah, they use these gray outlined rectangular boxes with dark, bold text to highlight them, right?
Right. And those 4 pillars are 1, extreme demographic expansion, 2, massive macroeconomic volatility fueled by oil, 3, a miraculous but fragile public health rebound, and 4, the deep-rooted governance bottlenecks holding everything back.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the scale of the transformation we are about to explore is just wild. Let's start with that first pillar, the sheer human scale of this story.
Demographics. Because before you can understand the economy, you have to understand who actually makes up the economy.
Exactly, and the demographic data on slide 3, looking from the early 90s up to 2023, is frankly difficult to wrap your head around.
It is a phenomenal expansion. I mean, the data shows the total population skyrocketing from roughly 5.23 million people to over 37 million.
Wait, 5.23 million to 37 million
Yeah.
in just a few decades.
Yes. The researchers use this combination chart to show it. There's this dark gray area chart showing the absolute population growth, and then a light gray line chart tracking the growth rate.
Oh, right, and they have those red arrows pointing to the peaks in the growth rate.
Exactly. Because they maintained an annual growth rate of 3.0 to 3.5% year over year for decades.
Wow.
And to put that in perspective, a sustained growth rate of 3% means your entire population doubles roughly every 23 years.
Okay, let's pause and visualize what that actually means on the ground. Think about the physical infrastructure of a city.
Like roads, plumbing, all of that.
Right. Say you have a capital city whose water pipes, electrical grid, and schools were designed to accommodate, at most, a few million people. Now, over a very short historical window, the population expands by a factor of 7.
Yeah, you have 37 million people pouring into the same physical space.
Trying to use the exact same foundational infrastructure. The area chart in the report showing this absolute growth looks like a tidal wave, or just a wall moving straight up.
And that visual of a wall moving up represents an immense pressure cooker, because it's not just about the total number of people, it's about who those people are.
Right, the age breakdown.
Exactly. The researchers point to a critical metric here called the youth dependency ratio, which they note hovers right around 90%.
I think a lot of people hear dependency ratio and their eyes just kind of glaze over. It sounds like pure economic jargon.
It does, but it's fundamentally about survival and wealth creation.
Right. I like to think of the youth dependency ratio like an airplane trying to take off. The working age adults are the engines and the youth are the cargo.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. So if you have 100 engines, 100 working-age adults, and they're trying to lift 90 massive cargo containers, the plane is so heavy you can barely get off the runway.
Exactly. A 90% ratio means for every 100 adults in their prime working years, there are 90 children and youths who need to be fed, clothed, housed, and educated before they can contribute a single dollar to the economy.
Right. So in economic theory, people always talk about a massive youth population as this great demographic dividend, right?
Yes, exactly. If you look at South Korea or Japan in the mid-20th century, they used a booming youth population as an army of future workers to industrialize rapidly.
But there's a catch here for Angola.
A huge catch. That dividend only pays out if those youths are actually educated and can find formal jobs.
Right.
Before they reach working age, they represent a crushing dependency pressure. The working adults are spread so thin just trying to provide basic daily survival like food and shelter that it becomes mathematically impossible for most families to save money.
You can't invest in a business or build generational wealth if every cent goes to keeping 90 kids fed for every 100 adults.
Exactly. And when you dig into the specific challenges of that youth demographic, Slide 11 highlights a major structural bottleneck regarding gender.
Oh, yes. The adolescent fertility rates. This is the number of births per 1,000 women between the ages of 15 and 19.
Right. And the visual here combines an area chart with this massive, bold KPI number.
Yeah, and the data shows it dropping from 162 down to about 140. There's even a little downward arrow pointing that out.
There is, but the annotation right next to it is crucial.
Well, yeah, I have to ask about that. Because if the rate dropped from 162 to 140, isn't that a public health win? Why does the report treat it like a crisis?
It's a crucial distinction between a positive trend and a sustainable baseline. The trend is moving in the right direction, absolutely. But 140 births per 1,000 adolescent women is still an exceptionally high absolute baseline.
Right, we're talking about girls of high school age.
Precisely.
Right.
Teenagers. And the mechanism here is what really matters. When early marriage and early childbearing remain that prevalent, it acts as an immediate, severe roadblock to human capital development.
Because they have to drop out.
Exactly. If a young woman has a child at 16, her statistical likelihood of finishing secondary school just plummets. Her chances of entering a university or getting formal, skilled employment practically disappear.
So while the number is trending down slightly, the absolute volume of young women having children means you are effectively trying to modernize an economy with half your potential workforce sidelined.
You nailed it. The annotation literally says that the absolute base still hinders female higher education and formal employment. You can't leapfrog into a modern economy if half your demographic dividend is permanently pulled out of the education system before they even reach adulthood.
It completely changes the trajectory of their lives and obviously the country's GDP.
And this ties into a broader sociological reality. When women are excluded from higher education and formal labor markets, families tend to remain larger, which feeds right back into that 90% youth dependency ratio we just talked about.
It's a self-perpetuating cycle.
Completely.
Okay, so we have this incredible population explosion and this massive generation being born into a high-pressure environment.
Yeah.
But survival is just the baseline.
Right.
So what are the actual chances of these millions of infants surviving to adulthood compared to 30 years ago? Because you can't have a population boom like that without something fundamental changing in the health of the nation.
This is where the data shifts from sobering to almost miraculous. Slide 6 maps out what they call the public health rebound, and the numbers from the 1990s are just chillin'.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. In the early 90s, life expectancy at birth was just 37.9 years.
I want everyone listening to just sit with that number for a second. 37.9 years.
We are talking about an entire society where the mathematical average of a human life ends before the age of 40, before you even have a chance to see your own children grow up.
It represents what the report classifies as the historical trauma phase. This was a period driven by devastating conflict, where agricultural systems failed, clean water was scarce, and the medical infrastructure just completely collapsed.
But if you look at the trajectory of the data over the last 3 decades, it's wild. They use this deep green step chart, right?
Yes, the step chart. And it shoots upward. Year by year, life expectancy climbs, eventually landing in recent years at 64.6 years.
They put an upward trend arrow right in the middle of it. That is an addition of over 26 years to the average lifespan in a single generation. It's an unbelievable leap.
What's fascinating here is how they achieve it.
Yeah. How does a country mathematically do that? Did they suddenly build state-of-the-art hospitals with MRI machines in every single province?
No, and that is a really important misconception to clear up. The text box next to that step chart explicitly notes that the steep upward trend reflects the marginal effects of post-war rebuilding and very basic medical interventions.
Explain that concept for us, the marginal effects.
Well, when your baseline life expectancy is 37.9 years, the leading causes of death are usually preventable diseases, malnutrition, and contaminated water. You don't need a multi-million-dollar oncology ward to double life expectancy. You need to boil water. You need basic vaccines for measles and polio.
You need antibiotics for simple infections and fundamental sanitation systems.
Exactly. The marginal return on a $1 investment in clean water in a post-trauma environment saves exponentially more lives than a $1 million investment in advanced surgery.
And you see that exact phenomenon when you look at the mortality rates for the most vulnerable populations, mothers and infants. Slide 7 visually contrasts these two metrics, and it is staggering.
Oh, the tornado chart. Yes.
Yeah, this double-sided bar chart. On the left, it shows infant mortality, meaning babies dying before their first birthday, dropping from a horrifying peak of 137 deaths per 1,000 live births down into the 40 to 50 range.
Which, to be fair, is still elevated by developed world standards. But going from nearly 14% of all babies dying down to 4 or 5% is a monumental societal shift.
And the left side of that chart has this gray shading over the early years labeled historical trauma. And the right side is clean white, labeled public health recovery.
It's such a powerful visual way to show the transition.
It really is.
Okay.
And the maternal mortality data on the right side of that tornado chart is even more profound. The lifetime risk of a woman dying from pregnancy-related causes improved from 1 in 11 down to 1 in 106.
Think about the psychological weight of a 1 in 11 chance of death.
That means every single person in the country knew a mother, a sister, or a friend who died in childbirth. It makes the act of building a family an incredibly dangerous gamble.
Moving that needle to 1 in 106 is a paradigm shift for the entire culture. It transitions childbirth from being a likely death sentence in your community to being a manageable, survivable medical event.
The early period of this data is a dark era, but the recent data represents a genuine public health victory. But the researchers are very careful not to paint this as a completely solved problem, right?
Far from it. Slide 8 is entirely dedicated to the infectious disease bottleneck, specifically looking at HIV.
Yeah, they use this spline chart, this smooth curve, with a shaded error band underneath it representing the plausible bounds. And the data shows the infection rate for the 15 to 49 age group shooting up like a rocket.
Right, from 0.3% in the early 90s to almost 2.0%, but then it just hits this invisible ceiling.
Exactly. It plateaus. They draw a horizontal dashed line showing it stabilizing around 1.4 to 1.8%. So I'm trying to reconcile this. If basic public health interventions push life expectancy up so fast, why did the infectious disease rate get stuck?
That is the big question. Why couldn't they push that number down to 0?
Yeah.
Well, it cuts to the heart of how public health systems actually operate. The report makes a crucial distinction between what it takes to prevent a disease and what it takes to treat a chronic, lifelong illness.
Right.
When a country rolls out initial awareness campaigns, distributing condoms, basic blood screening, public education, those prevention methods work quickly to stop an exponential curve. That is how you hit that dashed line and get the plateau.
So the easy work was done, relatively speaking.
Relatively, yes. But pushing infections down further or keeping the people who are already positive alive and healthy requires deep, complex, systemic healthcare infrastructure.
And the annotation on the chart specifically mentions needing to deepen the coverage of antiretroviral therapy or ART, right?
Exactly. And ART isn't just a pill you take once and you're cured.
No, it's a lifelong commitment.
It requires an uninterrupted supply of medication. That means you need a cold chain supply system, refrigerated trucks, and storage facilities to keep the drugs viable in hot climates.
You need trained medical staff to constantly monitor patient viral loads.
You need rural clinics that patients can access easily every single month without facing severe social stigma. Building a complex logistical network like that is infinitely harder than setting up a temporary vaccination tent.
And that is exactly why ART coverage remains a critical bottleneck, holding back further public health gains.
Yes. So we've got this incredible yet complicated victory. The infants are surviving, the mothers are surviving, the population is booming.
But survival is just the baseline. Suddenly, you have a massive generation of kids who are growing up, reaching the age of 10, 12, 14, and they need to be educated.
And when we look at slide 9, where they are supposed to learn, the math completely breaks down. This takes us into the illusion of human capital.
Illusion is the perfect word, because at first glance, the education data looks like another massive victory. The report shows primary gross enrollment exceeding 140%, sometimes hitting 150%.
And I know a lot of people will look at that and think, wait, how can enrollment be over 100%? How do you have 150% of a population in school?
Yeah, it sounds like a typo.
It does, but it's actually a mathematical quirk of post-conflict societies. Gross enrollment ratios can exceed 100% when you have a massive backlog of older, out-of-school children finally returning to primary education.
Oh, I see.
If a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old is enrolling in first grade alongside 6-year-olds because the schools were closed during a war, they both count toward the gross enrollment number. It pushes the total past 100% of the standard primary age population.
So the demand is clearly there. The kids are showing up, eager to learn. But here is where it gets tragic. The data shows a pupil-teacher ratio of 30-1, stretching all the way up to 50-1 in many areas.
And the visual they use for this is brilliant, the dot matrix or waffle chart.
Oh man, the waffle chart. It is so visceral. It's just a sea of little gray circles, 50 of them surrounding one single emphasized circle representing the teacher.
It visually overwhelms the viewer, just as the teacher is overwhelmed in the physical classroom.
I want to use an analogy here for what this actually means. Imagine you have a rich, highly nutritious pot of soup that was carefully prepared to feed 10 people.
Okay.
But suddenly, 50 people show up your door. You can't turn them away, so you just keep adding boiling water to the pot to make it stretch. Eventually, you hand everyone a bowl.
So everyone gets fed?
Well, the access is there.
Right,
Everyone
yeah.
got a bowl. But there is absolutely no nutrition left in the broth. The quality has been completely diluted.
That analogy hits the nail on the head, because what is actually happening in a room with 50 kids and one teacher? It becomes pure crowd control.
Right. Going to school does not equal learning skills.
If you are sitting in the back of a sweltering room with 49 other kids, sharing a single outdated textbook, and the teacher is just trying to keep everyone quiet, you are not acquiring high-level cognitive skills.
You aren't learning advanced mathematics, critical thinking, or digital literacy.
Exactly. The annotation on that waffle chart points out that this resource dilution severely impacts the actual accumulation of human capital. You have millions of kids getting a piece of paper that says they attended school, but they lack the practical skills needed to compete in a modern economy.
And this creates a terrifying domino effect, because eventually those 50 kids in that classroom have to graduate and they have to enter the workforce.
They have to become those engines we talked about earlier.
Exactly. So what kind of labor market is waiting for them on slide 10?
A highly precarious one. The data on the labor market reveals a massive structural trap. The researchers use a 100% stacked bar chart to contrast formal wage workers with vulnerable or self-employed workers.
And the numbers are grim. The report classifies an astonishing 66% of all jobs in the country as vulnerable employment.
And when you look at the block for female employment specifically, which they highlight with this large, light gray shaded area, over 50% is categorized as self-employment.
I want to stop you right there, because the language here can be really deceptive. In a Western context, when we hear self-employment or freelance, we picture like a tech startup founder working from a trendy coffee shop, or a graphic designer setting their own hours.
Yes, and the report is explicit about dismantling that myth. They have a straight line pulling out from that gray block that says this is hidden unemployment and low-quality jobs without a social safety net.
Right. When economists talk about vulnerable employment in a developing context, they are not talking about tech startups. They are talking about survival.
They are talking about a woman selling produce on the side of a dusty road, or a young man washing windows in traffic. It is informal subsistence labor.
These are highly volatile jobs. There is no sick leave, there are no pensions, no health insurance, and absolutely no legal protections.
If you get sick and can't sell your goods on the street that day, your family simply doesn't eat.
So, because those overcrowded classrooms, graduate students without advanced, marketable skills, the formal sector, the offices, the banks, the engineering firms, simply cannot absorb them.
So they default to the informal sector just to survive, and it becomes a macroeconomic trap.
How so?
You cannot build a strong national tax base on the backs of subsistence street vendors. If the government can't collect taxes, they can't fund the schools to lower that 50-1 teacher ratio, which means the next generation also ends up in vulnerable employment.
Which brings us to the massive, multi-billion-dollar elephant in the room. Because I'm sure you, the listener, are looking at this puzzle and thinking, wait a minute, we established at the very beginning that this country is sitting on $70 billion of oil wealth.
Right.
How can a country with that much money struggle to build schools, pay teachers, or create formal jobs?
And that question leads us directly to slide 4, into the macroeconomic data. This is where we see the concept of the resource curse play out in real time.
The numbers here are just a wild ride. They use this double-axis line graph.
Yeah, the main axis is a dark blue solid line tracking GDP in constant 2015 dollars, and the secondary axis is a light gray dashed line tracking oil rents as a percentage of GDP.
And the solid line shows GDP growing from roughly $25.9 billion up to about $73 billion.
Which is massive economic growth on paper.
On paper, yes. But the composition of that GDP, that light gray dashed line, is where the danger lies. The data shows oil rents peaking at a staggering 57.5% of the total GDP.
There's a downward arrow right at that peak explicitly warning about how vulnerable this makes them. Over half of the entire nation's economy was generated by a single commodity.
Meanwhile, revenues from other resources like coal or minerals sat at almost exactly 0%.
0%.
So over half the economy is just oil. What happens to the other industries? Why doesn't the oil wealth lift up the farmers and the factory workers?
This is the mechanism known as the Dutch disease, which is a core component of the resource curse. When a country exports massive amounts of oil, billions of dollars of foreign currency flood into the national treasury.
Now that sounds great.
It does, but that massive influx artificially drives up the value of the local currency.
Okay, let's walk through what that means for an everyday person.
Yeah.
Imagine you are a farmer in Angola growing coffee or maize.
Right. Because your country's currency is now artificially strong due to the oil money, the coffee you grow is suddenly much more expensive for other countries to buy. You become completely uncompetitive on the global market.
No.
At the same time, because the local currency is so strong, it becomes cheaper for the country to just import foreign food and goods rather than producing them domestically.
So the oil sector essentially chokes out domestic agriculture and manufacturing. It destroys the very industries that would normally provide formal jobs for that massive youth population we were just talking about.
Precisely. And to make matters worse, the oil sector itself is highly capital intensive, not labor intensive.
Right, it's just machines.
It requires multi-million-dollar offshore rigs, complex machinery, and a handful of highly specialized, often foreign engineers. It does not require millions of factory workers.
So you have a country generating unbelievable wealth, but the mechanism generating that wealth doesn't create broad-based mass employment.
And what happens when the global price of oil drops? Because commodities are notoriously volatile.
Yeah.
When the price of oil inevitably crashes, as it did in 2014, for example, the entire national budget collapses with it. The government suddenly can't pay for those imported goods, they can't pay civil servants, and the economy goes into a tailspin.
Which brings us to slide 5, and perhaps the most terrifying data point in this entire report. The hyperinflation.
Oh, the CPI chart, yes.
When the revenue collapses, the economic pain transferred to the population is severe. We are looking at the Historical Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The researchers had to use a logarithmic chart just to fit the numbers on the page.
Yeah, without a log scale, the peak would just flatten everything else into an invisible line at the bottom of the page.
Exactly. And they have this red circle highlighting the peak. The historical CPI spiked to an unfathomable 4,145.1%.
4,145.1%. It's a number that breaks standard economic models.
Let's explain the mechanism behind that, because a country doesn't just wake up to 4,000% inflation by accident. Why did it happen?
It happened during that historical trauma phase we discussed earlier. During the civil conflict, traditional revenue streams collapsed. The government still needed to fund the war effort, pay soldiers, and keep the state apparatus running, but they had no tax base and no stable export revenue.
So they resorted to the last option available.
They turned on the money printers, they rapidly increased the money supply without any underlying economic growth to back it up.
And when you flood a system with paper money, the value of that money plummets. I want to walk through the math of purchasing power erosion, because inflation is fundamentally a hidden tax on the poorest people in a society.
A brutal tax.
Imagine you get a new job, and they offer you $1 million salary. You feel rich, right? But then you walk into a cafe, and a simple cup of coffee costs $1 million. Your nominal wealth is an illusion.
And imagine what that does to your savings. If you somehow manage to save 1,000 local currency units under your mattress at 4,000% inflation, within a year, those savings can't even buy a single grain of
The
rice.
wealth you accumulated through your labor is instantly evaporated.
And the chart shows that even in recent years, the inflation rates are still deeply punitive, hovering in the 20 to 30% range. There's a horizontal line pulling out from that 30% mark that explains how this continuous price volatility continuously erodes bottom-tier purchasing power.
Right. If you are that street vendor we talked about earlier, making a tiny daily profit in the local currency, and the price of cooking oil, flour, or transportation doubles every few months, your labor is constantly being devalued.
The elites, the people connected to the oil industry or the government, can protect themselves. They have access to foreign currency like US dollars, or they hold hard assets like real estate that retain value.
But the vulnerable workforce.
They absorb the full devastating impact of the inflation. It destroys trust in the local currency and makes long-term business planning impossible.
So if we pull back and look at the whole picture, we have an exploding population, millions of youths graduating from diluted schools into a precarious informal labor market, and an economy on a terrifying roller coaster of oil dependence and inflation.
It's a perfect storm.
When people are trapped in rural poverty under these conditions, what do? They move, they migrate to the cities looking for whatever sliver of that oil wealth they can find.
Yes, rapid population growth meeting economic stagnation inevitably leads to mass urban migration. Millions of people pack up and move to megacities like Luanda.
But how does a physical city handle that influx without preparation? Slide 12 looks at the environmental strain, and it's immense.
They use this heat map grid to show PM 2.5 air pollution exposure.
Right, these are the microscopic particles that get deep into your lungs and bloodstream. The data shows that the population is breathing air that contains 23 to 24 micrograms per cubic meter.
And they have a red-dashed reference line showing the World Health Organization standard, which is just 10.
So they are breathing more than double the toxic particulate matter considered safe, day in and day out.
When urbanization happens without infrastructure, the environment buckles. The city doesn't have enough paved roads, so millions of informal vehicles kick up dust. There isn't enough clean public transport.
There is no comprehensive municipal waste management, so you have massive informal burning of trash just to get rid of it.
Exactly. The physical environment itself becomes toxic, which feeds right back into those public health bottlenecks we discussed earlier. You end up spending resources treating respiratory diseases instead of building the economy.
Now, we are coming to slide 13, a section of the report that requires us to be very precise. Because looking at why a country struggles to pave roads, build schools, or manages oil wealth inevitably leads to questions of governance.
Right. Why is the machinery of the state failing to process this wealth?
The researchers address this through an entirely data-driven lens, specifically using the World Bank Governance Indicators, or WGI.
And it is important to state clearly that we are looking at these WGI metrics purely as standardized global academic data points. Economists use these indicators worldwide to assess institutional capacity impartially.
Right, we aren't taking sides here, just reporting what the World Bank data shows, and the report uses this incredible radar chart showing these governance metrics.
Yeah, they use a polygonal shadow to mark the zero line, the standard normal distribution mean.
And every single data point for institutional quality falls into the negative hemisphere inside that zero line.
It's a stark visual.
The metric for control of corruption hovers deep in the negative, between -1.1 and -1.4. The metric for rule of law is stuck in the -1.0 to -1.6 range.
There is a slight positive trend in political stability, recovering from the war years, going from -1.7 to -0.3, but the overall institutional framework remains deeply in the negative spectrum.
The annotation here is really blunt. It calls this the governance deficit and labels it the core pain point restricting economic transformation.
This is what the researchers identify as the true underlying bottleneck of the entire country. You can have $73 billion in GDP from oil, but corruption and a lack of rule of law act as severe economic friction.
Explain how that friction works practically. How does corruption stop a school from being built?
It's not just a moral failing, it is a mechanical failure of the economy. If the government allocates $1 million to build a new school to lower that 50-to-1 teacher ratio, but the system lacks transparency, a percentage of that money gets siphoned off at the federal level.
Right.
Then a percentage is taken at the provincial level. By the time the money reaches the local contractor, there is only enough left to build a half-finished concrete shell with no roof.
And certainly not enough to pay a qualified teacher a living wage.
Exactly. So the oil wealth never actually converts into human capital.
And what does that mean for outside investment?
Well, without the rule of law, foreign capital flees. If you are an international manufacturing company looking to build a factory that could provide thousands of formal jobs, you aren't going to invest in a country where your contracts aren't protected by a reliable court system.
The risk premium is just too high.
Exactly. So the only foreign direct investment you attract is predatory capital companies that just want to extract the oil, pay the necessary bribes, and leave, rather than investing in the sustainable development of the workforce.
Governance is literally the machinery that converts raw resources into societal progress. When the metrics are negative, the machinery is broken.
It's a systemic bottleneck.
Okay, this has been an incredibly heavy deep dive. We've explored demographic pressure, fragile public health, diluted education, hyperinflation, and severe governance deficits. I am desperately looking for the light at the end of the tunnel here. Tell me there is a path forward in this data.
There is, and it is found on slide 14. It's one specific chart that cuts through all the structural gloom. Amidst all these bottlenecks, there is one line that points almost straight up.
The slope graph.
Yes, it tracks the digital infrastructure mobile subscriptions and internet usage skyrocketing from the early 2000s up to today.
There's a big, bold arrow at the end of it and a little smartphone icon talking about the latecomer advantage, doesn't it?
Yes, the digital leapfrog. Think about how telecommunications developed in the West. We spent decades and billions upon billions of dollars physically laying down copper landlines to every single house.
Digging up streets, maintaining telephone poles.
Exactly. Angola didn't have to do that. They bypassed that entire incredibly expensive, slow era of physical infrastructure. They leaped straight over the copper wire and went directly to cellular networks and mobile internet.
They leapfrogged it completely.
Yeah.
Which means you suddenly have millions of young people who might be sitting in a crowded, underfunded classroom or working an informal job selling fruit on the street, but they have a supercomputer in their pocket.
Right. They are instantly connected to global information, digital banking, and external markets.
It is a profound democratization of access, and it forms the basis of the researchers' final policy prescriptions on slide 15.
Yeah, synthesizing everything we've talked about. The report uses this clean, three-column infographic layout to distill the solution down to three non-negotiable pillars.
No charts here, just dark gray boxes, minimalist wireframes, and text. Let's walk through them. Pillar 1.
Pillar 1, break resource dependence. The country simply cannot survive the roller coaster of having 57.5% of its GDP tied to oil rents. They have to use whatever oil revenue they have left to aggressively subsidize and diversify into agriculture, light manufacturing, and services.
They must insulate themselves from global price shocks. Number 2.
Pillar 2. Deepen human capital. You cannot build a modern economy if 50 students are sharing one teacher. They have to aggressively fund educational quality, not just access.
And break the health bottlenecks too, right?
Absolutely. Investing in those complex cold chain logistics to scale up RT for HIV and addressing childhood malnutrition so that kids actually have the cognitive capacity to learn when they are in the classroom.
And the final pillar, which ties it all together.
Pillar 3. Rebuild institutional foundations. Improving those World Bank governance indicators. Raising the rule of law and controlling corruption is the only way to attract sustainable, long-term foreign direct investment.
They need capital that builds factories, transfers technology, and trains workers, not just capital that extracts crude oil.
Exactly. It's about rebuilding the bedrock.
So why spend all this time unpacking the socioeconomic data of Angola? What does this mean for you, the listener? I think this deep dive serves as an absolute masterclass in understanding the growing pains of resource-rich developing nations anywhere in the world.
It really dismantles the myth that wealth is synonymous with development.
You can have billions of dollars of liquid gold beneath your feet, but if you don't have the transparent institutions to process it, the schools to educate your use, and the health systems to keep them alive, that wealth isn't a blessing. It becomes a trap.
It's a stark reminder that human capital, the minds and health of the people, is the only truly renewable resource a country actually has.
Absolutely. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over that builds on this data but looks to the future. We just talked about that digital leapfrog, the skyrocketing mobile phone usage.
Yeah, the one chart going straight up.
Imagine this collision. You have a massive, rapidly expanding, digitally connected youth population.
Hmm.
They are online, they see the global economy, they can learn to code on a smartphone, but physically, they are living in a traditional economy that offers them nothing but vulnerable, informal street employment, constrained by broken physical infrastructure and heavy institutional corruption.
It is a highly volatile, highly potent mix.
It is. So the ultimate question is this: could the digital economy bypass those traditional bottlenecks entirely?
Oh, wow.
Right? Could this massive youth demographic use mobile money, decentralized finance, digital services, and the global internet to build a new virtual economy that is completely independent of the oil sector and the traditional government institutions?
That is a fascinating frontier. If the physical institutions won't let you build on the ground, do you just build your economy in the cloud?
Exactly. Will the next wave of economic development happen not through paving physical roads and building traditional factories, but through digital networks that simply leapfrog the broken machinery of the state?
It completely redefines what a developing economy might look like in the 21st century.
It really does. Something to think about the next time you look at a simple bar chart of a nation's GDP and wonder what is really happening on the ground. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the data. Keep questioning the numbers behind the headlines.